Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're here with Ben Elder and Tony Francis, and we're going to talk today about Ben Elder's Weissenborn exploration. Ben is a native of Los Angeles, the epicenter, you could say the epicenter of the Weissenborn world, where Weissenborns were made, where arguably the greatest Weissenborn players were from. So I think one great place to start is just how you got interested in Weissenborn, and I guess specifically where were you, or what were you doing the first time you actually heard of Weissenborn, and what effect did it have on you?
I've been trying to reconstruct history. The Big Bang was a David Lindley concert at McCabe's Guitar Shop in
Sure,
Santa
me too.
Monica
Yeah.
in the late 80s.
So we're going to bring Tony Francis in just a second. So Tony lives in New Zealand and is, in my opinion, one of, if not the finest builder of contemporary Weissenborn guitars alive today. Has spent an incredible amount of time researching, understanding the most minute details of Hermann Weissenborn's original construction. He's done a lot of rebuilds. He's done a lot of restorations. Builds a great instrument. But Tony, you want to chime in here? I'd like for you to sort of pick up where I left off, and I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit, from a builder's perspective. I'm sure you have a few questions as well.
Of course. I think to pass through the Weissenborn name, you pass through Ben Elder's name. It's been a constant reference since I started this journey, I guess. I think the most obvious one is I thought Ben was credited on the first 3 or 4 Ben Harper records, but I was actually going through this yesterday. He's credited on an astounding 6 Ben Harper records as official
That's awesome.
researcher and advisor on Weissenborn and related instruments.
To my slight modest embarrassment, but yes.
I think that's quite an unusual.
You don't have to do that,
It's quite an it's an unusual title for a musician to give to a historian, I think. Ben, I think what separates you from other historians in your class, I guess, is your work with musicians. I know if Ben Elder has a style 4 for sale, there's not just the style 4, it's in its original case. And there's a photo of the musician that played it in the 50s, or, just the sort of stuff that no one else has. I know that you've interviewed people that have a living connection to the Weissenborn company, that you started your own company to what were involved in the American Guitar Company, in reproducing, that as Rob has mentioned, you've done, you've authored for Acoustic Guitar Magazine and been mentioned in many other publications, including Vintage Guitar. And I think, for an instrument where there's so much misinformation and where everyone is really an expert, which can be challenging, I think this is cool because it's a rare opportunity to talk to the Don or the OG. You were really the first. Your article predates any other material on it. So that's cool. It's cool to have the privilege. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, how I came to be aware of you, when I started studying the Weissenborn. And I suppose it was, like I say, the early, I would go down to the CD store and walk home from school with my Ben Harper records, and I'd be reading through the liner notes, and you were always credited in there as the official researcher. And later on, as I started building instruments, I came across, actually at the shop of Steve Evans from Beltona, this, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
I came across this business card for you, but I don't think it was until much later that I forget how we started communicating, maybe email or somehow, but I remember getting, one day I just got this delightful email from you, and I think you'd been at Ben Harper's home or studio, and how do I say this? You sent me this email saying that you'd seen the guitar that my friend Thomas had given to him that I'd made, and that you needed to test it for properties of levitation,
Yeah.
which I just thought was a beautiful and eccentric compliment. And I just remember feeling really seen in that moment. And so I've always been grateful to you for that. How did you meet Ben Harper?
I worked at a part-time at a acoustic music store, mostly bluegrass and folk and things like that. And this store put on a bluegrass festival kind of up in the mountains above LA. And I lived way over on the west side of LA. So I thought, well, God, if I'm going all the way over to Azusa and up into the mountains, I may as well keep going to Claremont, because I've heard about the Claremont Folk Music Center, and I'd been hearing about this other guy named Ben who was into Weissenborns. And I thought, relatively speaking, that's right on my way. It was, a few miles up. And I just dropped in one day, and this was when before he was big, he was working in the shop. He was in the repair shop that day, and I just introduced myself and told him. We started comparing notes, and that's how he couldn't believe there was somebody that nutty out there, and we were kindred spirits.